I was born in Columbus, Ohio, during the Depression, of course, 1928. My mother died when I was 3, and my dad died when I was 13. I don't remember a thing about my mother. I think I remember standing on my crib with my hands on the top of it and seeing a woman going back and forth. And the reason I thought it was a woman was because it was a flowery dress, so something a man wouldn't wear, whatever it was. And I think I remember that, but I couldn't swear to it. But I think that's what my only remembrance of her is. Don't remember her being near me at all. So that's another terrible thing to go through for a kid. And so anyway, it was tough growing up that way. Of course, the Depression was on most of my growing up time, and that was tough. It was very tough. I hope we never go through another Depression like that in this country. I mean, I can remember my 2 sisters and I eating 1 can of beans or whatever we could get, and we thought we were doing good to get that, because a lot of people couldn't even get that much. But my dad would try to leave a quarter on the mantelpiece every morning when he went to work, and if he had it, and if he didn't, we just had to do the best we could. But that type of thing sticks with you for the rest of your life. People kid me all the time about things I do that have carried over from the Depression days. A friend of mine, she always laughs if I go to a store that they have sales on, Just, for instance, there's a store called Kohl's around. I don't know whether they have them here or not, but up in Pennsylvania they have them, and they're always having a sale, 30% off or something like that, So I buy things, I go there and buy it. I'm not going anywhere anyway. So they always kid me about it, and I said, well, if you go through some hard times once in a while, you might find out that you have to live different than what you normally do. I never was a very good student, and I hated school. I was there because I had to be there. I didn't do the best I could, like most kids. I always wanted to be in the Army. From the time I was a little kid, other kids wanted to be firemen and policemen. I wanted to be a soldier. I always read the newspapers and went to movies when I could, and would see the movies in news at the theaters. I guess they don't do that anymore. I haven't been to a movie for so long. But during the war, they used to show world news, and of course Hitler was in his glory in 1932 when he took over. I remember all of the stuff that went on when they took over Austria, and then they went into Czechoslovakia, and then they got involved with the British and the French. But yes, I remember when the Germans were building up, very, very much so, and I read about them all the time, and knew all the names of the head people and what they did, and a lot of the generals, never thinking I'd run into some of them later on. And then, of course, we started having trouble with the Japanese, and that came to light when the Japanese had that what they called the Nanking rape of Nanking. The rape of Nanking was when the Japanese went into China, and they took over, and they just wantonly killed anybody and everybody that they saw, putting them down on their knees and shooting them in the back of the head and having them fall into a ditch. And there was a famous picture of the time, a little Chinese baby sitting on the ground crying, dirty as he could be, and he's crying. And that picture went all over the country, and people just felt terrible about that. So they were worried about the Japanese and the Germans both. And I wanted to be in the Army, either in the infantry or armor. I especially liked armor because it showed a lot of tanks during training and that kind of thing that people were taking. And I always thought I'd probably like that. And I never thought I'd be able to get into it, but I did. I would buy publications, and the Department of, well, it was a War Department at that time, they used to have documents that they would sell. You could mail in and get them, and there were different things about the war and different things that they learned about it, like Molotov cocktails and that type of thing that we didn't know a whole lot about at the time. And I would read those and kept them for years. Wish I still had them now. I remember one time I had a friend in the neighborhood, a man that was in business of some kind, and he stopped me one day on the street and he said, you want to go in the Army, don't you? And I thought, I'd love to. And he says, well, you know, the Army's got a new program that they're taking people that are 17 and a half. And I said, you might give them a try. So I went down and talked to them, and they said, yeah, are you 17 and a half? And of course I lied to them. I was only 15. I told them I was 17 and a half. And the idea was to get people into the Army so that the Navy and Marines couldn't get them, because they had a equal type program where a guy could go in at 17 in the Navy or Marines. He told me, well, you'll have to go down and get a birth certificate. So I went down to get the birth certificate, and I thought, how am I going to change this thing around so that nobody knows I'm changing it? So I got there and I went to get the birth certificate, and then the lady at that time, they had a big book about like this, and about that thick. It was, they would write births in hand, you know, by hand. And she couldn't find my birth certificate. And I said, well, gee, what am I supposed to do? And she said, I don't know. She says, you better tell them that we just don't have one. So I went back and told the recruiter that. And he said, oh, don't worry about it. It happens all the time. And I said, well, are you going to take me? He says, yeah, I'll take you. So they took me into the Army, and it was kind of a reserve type thing, actually. But while I was there, I picked up a document that they had that you could take with you. And it told about how you could go on active duty if you applied for it. So I applied for active duty, and I got it. Fort Knox was the armor center. And so I went there for my basic training, and we trained, first of all, with as many infantry weapons as we would possibly ever get involved with. We were instructed in all of them, had a firearm. And then we went to driving after that, and we'd start off with a Jeep, and then a truck, and then a light tank. Well, we were supposed to go into medium tanks besides that, but we didn't because they had a rush on, and they wanted the Army in overseas wanted to get more troops. They needed them because the war looked like the war was slowing down in '44. They told the basic training bases to get us through there as fast as we can, even if we have to cut the training period short, which they did. And so I ended up as a tank crewman on a light tank. They were such a hurry, they didn't even want to give us a leave home like they normally did, but they were rushing us to get us overseas. So they sent me to Fort Ord, California. That sure wasn't overseas. But I got there and I put my bag down, and they said, just leave it there and go get in line. And there was 2 lines of 6 medics standing there giving shots in both arms as you went through. And they gave me shots for stuff I never heard of, elephantitis and sleeping sickness and I don't know what all. And I had a shot record already from basic training about as long as your arm, but I got those additional shots. So I thought, uh-oh, I bet that means I'm going to the Pacific, which I didn't want to go to. I wanted to go to Europe. So anyway, I got my shots. When I got through, they called out my name and they said, go see somebody, some officer. I went to see him, and he said, don't bother to unpack, you're leaving. I said, where am I going? You'll find out. That was a standard answer. You'll find out. So I said, okay. So they let me sleep that night, and I woke up the next morning, and we stood reveille, and they called my name out, plus many other guys, and they told us to go down to the motor pool. Well, this unit was an amphibious tank battalion, and they had, instead of regular tanks, they had what they called LVTs, landing vehicle tracked. And you'll see a lot of those things in World War II movies about landings in the Pacific. And some of them, there were 4 models of the LVT. 2 were for carrying infantry, and the other 2 had a gun turret off of a light tank. One of them had the 37 millimeter gun on it, which was practically nothing. and the other one had a turret off of another light tank, what they called it an assault gun, or an M8, and it had a 75 millimeter gun on it. So anyway, we took them and put them on flat cars and sent them with us alongside of them, riding the train all back to Brooklyn Army Port. Took the line right up to the ship, and they just take them off the ship and put them off the train tracks and put them up on the ship. They put the troops in the hold of the ship, and they had a stack of bunks for them. And what the bunks were just bars that came out like this, and just about that wide, and had canvas stretched in between these things. And there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6 high, and about that much room between each one. And it might be exaggerating on that, but it's not much more than that. We had to get on there with all of our equipment, a full battle pack, a steel helmet, and the remainder of our clothes in our duffel bag. And the weapons, we had to hang the weapons on the end of the damn thing. So anyway, that's the way we started out. Well, unfortunately, nobody liked it. It was pretty bad. And for instance, the top guy where I was sleeping, he, as soon as he got on there, he just stayed there the whole trip and just stared up at the ceiling like that, and don't touch me, I'm sick. And we couldn't get him to get off of there and eat or anything. He stayed on that bunk the entire time. How he did that, I don't know, but when he got off, he was a mess. He could hardly walk. We hated it because we were so jammed in there that you couldn't move. And we're in there with all this other equipment and so forth, our weapons too. If we couldn't find a place to hang them, we had to put them in there with us. And so that was bad. They fed us twice a day. It was a late breakfast and a dinner meal. Well, I was scared of being torpedoed because I'm not a water person to start with. And but we made it okay. And I never got sick, but a lot of guys did. So when we got there, why, that was what we had to do. We went into Le Havre there and put our LVTs on these flat cars, railroad cars, and took them up to Antwerp, Belgium. Antwerp had been captured by the British. It was an estuary that went from the port of Antwerp, and went up to the Baltic Sea. So it was 82 miles long, and every time the British tried to run a ship down through the estuary, while the Germans were on the north side, and they'd keep firing at it, trying to sink it. So they had to stop trying to get ships in there. So about that time, Eisenhower had told Montgomery, the British general, he wanted that port opened. They wanted it opened as fast as he possibly can because we're bringing all of our supplies over the Normandy beaches. And if we could get that port, we could be much closer to bringing supplies in. Well, the British, Montgomery especially, he wanted to try what they called Operation Market Garden, which you may have heard of it. It was up in Holland, where they took the 101st and the 82nd Airborne Divisions, and each one took so many bridges for the British coming through. And the stupid part of it was the British were coming up one road only. And in Holland, the roads are up high because the ground is so soft there that if you get off the road, you start sinking in. So they used one road to go up to the town of Arnhem, and they landed airborne up near Arnhem, and they were destroyed. And thank God the American airborne divisions made it through okay. They lost a lot of people, but they made what they had to do. They made the job done. So that was very, very good. And so because of that, Eisenhower told Montgomery, he said, now I want that port open, the next thing you do. So he said, okay. So they landed up on the north side of the estuary, and they finally got the Germans out of there so that they could start bringing supplies in to the Antwerp port. As I recall, they opened the port around the 23rd of September. I could be wrong, but it's somewhere in there. So then we delivered them up there, and then we got back on trains, and they took us to back to Le Havre. And they used to have what they called cigarette camps over there. Cigarette camps were replacement depots. They were nothing but a group of tents. But anyway, we stayed there until they found a unit that needed people. So one day, a GI truck pulled up and called out my name. I think there was 2 or 3 of us, 3 or 4 of us probably. And they took us to my unit, which was the 740th Tank Battalion. The 740th was located in the town of Neufchâteau, just east of the town of Liège, which is a pretty well-known town in Belgium. And when we got there, the colonel of our battalion was told to go see the general in charge of the First Army and find out where he wants us to be. Well, he said, I want you to stay in the town of Neufchâteau in case we ever need you. But he said, I don't think we will because the war's almost over now. You probably never get even used. So he said, well, can I borrow? I said they had no tanks because they told them they would get new tanks when they got to Europe, to the mainland of Europe, when they were in England. Well, they never did get their new tanks, and finally they decided, well, you just stay there in the Neufchâteau and keep law and order and do your training, and we'll call you if we need you. Well, a funny thing happened that we found out about many years later, but one of the jobs was to patrol the area of the town because there was a curfew on of about, it seems to me like it was 7 o'clock at night. But anyway, there was this one guy, he was patrolling in a Jeep, and he saw this woman, Belgian woman, walking down the road. He stopped and he says, ma'am, he says, you have to go home, the curfew's on. She said, no, I have to go to the hospital. He says, no, you have to go home. She opens up her coat and says, I have to go to the hospital. And of course, she's very pregnant. So he said, hop in. And he took her to the emergency room. And on the way, she asked him his name. And never saw her again. Until many years later, we went back to the town of Neufchâteau in 1992, I believe it was. And we put up a monument that I designed and put the wording on and everything. I'm pretty proud of that. But anyway, we went over to have a official dedication of the monument. And after it was over, I was the MC for the program. So after it was over, this Belgian lady walked up to me and she says, Mr. So-and-so here? And I said, yeah, he's here. And she says, I wonder if I could talk to him. I said, sure. I said, you just stay right there and I'll go get him. So I found him and I said, there's a lady out here that wants to talk to you. He said, a lady? He said, I don't know any ladies. I said, well, I don't know what kind of females you know. I said, but this was a Belgian lady and she wants to talk to you. And he said, a Belgian lady? I don't know any Belgian ladies. I said, well, she knows you. Go with me. I introduced her to him and she told him who she was. And she told him about that night when he found her and had to take her to the emergency room. So he's standing there listening to this story about him. And she said, by the way, this young man here, about a 50-year-old man, was her son that was born that night, and she gave him the name of John Smith, and then the family name. And so that was it. It shocked this guy half to death. But on the way back, after the lady left, I told him, I said, you're the luckiest guy I ever saw. He said, why? And I said, you realize if you had had your wife with you, what you'd be doing for the rest of your life? And he said, yeah, I guess you're right. But anyway, we stayed in that town until the Battle of the Bulge started. We could hear in the distance, we could hear artillery being fired, and you could see the flashes on the light up on the clouds. It was very, very foggy that morning, rainy and foggy. And so we didn't know what it was or how far away it was, but we knew it was artillery fire. We didn't know if it was ours or theirs. So we didn't do anything but stood around trying to figure out, wonder what's going on. And finally, the next day, the 17th, the First Army headquarters got a hold of us and told us that it looked like it was a German breakthrough. So they said, you go down to the ordnance depot and take anything you want. Anything you want, just take it. So we thought, oh boy, great. We're finally going to get our new tanks. Well, we got down there to the ordnance depot. The whole battalion went down. And all they could find was knocked out tanks and missing radios on them, missing rammer staffs for the main gun, and no radios, and even the gun sights were taken off of them. And so anyway, we had to piece together. We finally got together 2 tanks and a tank destroyer. Well, we did find an artillery piece that was armored artillery, which was nothing more than the chassis of a Sherman tank, but it was open top, and it just had one gun in it. It was on the front of it, and it was all not really used for tank fighting. But anyway, we pieced all these together, and we got ordered to send what we had down to the railroad station in the town of Stoumont, Belgium. We got down there and found out from the infantry that they were sitting there scared to death. They were in the ditches alongside the road by the train station. And they told us the 1st SS Panzer Division is coming up the road. Now, the 1st SS Panzer Division was called the Adolf Hitler Division, and they were the ones that had been involved in the Malmedy massacre. I don't know whether you knew what that is or not, but they were the ones that pulled that dirty trick at Malmedy. We said, oh boy, this sounds like it's going to be something. So the first tank, there was a long curved road going down to the train station. Well, the first tank went around. I remember they don't have any sights on the guns. They had a bore sight up. In other words, look through the tube and see what you're going to shoot at. He came around the curve, ran in face to face with the first German Panther tank, and fired and knocked it out. Just boom, like that. He tried to reload, and the round got stuck, so no radio, so he had to use hand signals until the next tank to come up. So the next tank went up, and they ran into the second German tank, knocked it out. So about that time, the third, with the tank destroyer, it came around in back of him, and he ran into the third German tank, and he put 3 rounds into that tank, just like that, boom, 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 and knocked it out. The Germans turned around and retreated. Well, we were pretty proud of the fact that in the first half hour, with just 3 vehicles, we knocked out, or we stopped the 1st SS Panzer Division. The 1st SS Panzer Division was a mean outfit. They had been in Russia too long, and they had a bad habit of burning things and killing people that were innocent, just standing on the side of the road. They were nasty bad guys. We were with the 30th Division at that time, Infantry Division, and they were all thankful for us showing up and saving them. Well, then the next thing the Germans did, they came into the town of Stoumont, and they had a pretty good infantry fight in back of a house there that was brown and white, brown on the top and white on the bottom. They had a big fight there with the infantry. Well, they managed to get in, and into the center of town, and there was a hospital up on a hill there in the town of Stoumont. And the Germans had taken over this hospital, and they had captured some Germans from American infantry in there, 30th Division people again. They put a Panther tank at the end of the building. It was a long, narrow building. Put a German tank at the end of the building, and another vehicle that they had that was used for fighting aircraft. It just had 4 machine guns on it to fire in the air. So we knocked out that one. But that Panther tank, it knocked out 2 of our tanks. By that time, they gave us some more tanks. So they knocked off 2 of our tanks. And we couldn't get up to get that Panther. So what we did, we waited until nighttime, when it got dark, and we built a corduroy road up this hill so that they could get traction to get up there. Worked on it all night, 6 o'clock in the morning. We got up to the top where we could see that Panther tank, and we shot it and knocked it out right now. We relieved all the infantrymen that were in that building. They said every time they tried to go out in the hall to get out of there, well, the Germans would fire around right down the hallway and scare the heck out of them. So they just stayed there, thankful, waiting for somebody to come rescue them. So anyway, we got them out of there, and then we went down the basement, and there were 92, as I recall, 92 little kids and old folks down there. And there was a Catholic priest that was with them, and he was trying to keep these people quiet while all this fighting was going on. And he had a hell of a time, I guess. He told me he was just scared to death that they were going to come down there, because the Germans were mean. They would just kill people for no reason at all. The SS, especially the SS, we hated them. But when about that time we found out that this same first SS Panzer Division had performed that Normandy massacre, and the word came down: don't take prisoners. If it's the SS, kill them. They're too mean to be alive. So every time we saw SS after that, we shot them down. They would ride through a town, and there'd be a Belgians standing on the side of the road watching them come through, and the Germans just turn a gun on them and kill them. Because they're there, I guess. I guess that made them feel good, or made them look good to the other guys. I don't know what the reason they did it. That's what they did. And then the next town was the town of L'Église. And in L'Église, I was in the assault gun platoon of headquarters company, and we had Sherman tanks with 105 on it instead of a 75 or a 76 millimeter gun. We weren't made to fight tanks. We were made to be artillery to support the infantry. In other words, say they want to take a town, they'd come in first and they'd ask the people in the town to surrender, the Germans. And if they said no, well, they'd call up our kind of tanks, and we'd fire into it until they would get them to surrender. Destroy the town, that's what we had to do. And that was what the assault gun platoon was made for. So they lined us up, and they commandeered another 155, Long Tom they called it, that was bugging out. He was trying to get away from the Germans. Well, our colonel found out about him, and he sent his driver down and told him, he said, you better get yourself back up there by that chateau, because there's a lieutenant colonel up there that says he's going to court-martial you if you don't, if he doesn't shoot you first. So this guy, the second lieutenant, he took this Long Tom up, sat it next to our assault guns, and we opened fire on the town of L'Église and flattened it. We had just a regular field jacket to start with, which had no lining or anything. Finally, they came out with the linings for them, and they were okay, but they weren't warm enough. Nothing could be warm enough in that kind of weather. It was continual rain and fog, and then the rain turned to snow at the wrong time, just as the thing started. And it was cold, and a lot of guys didn't have gloves. I had an old 1942 style field jacket on, and it was like I froze to death. I had everything I owned on: long johns, OD shirt and pants, a sweater over the top of that, my jacket, and that was all I had. Finally, they came out with what we called a tanker suit, but the infantry liked them so well that they changed the name of it, called it a combat suit, which we didn't like, but that's what they did. They called it a combat suit, and they start issuing those out to us. But you could have had every coat on in the world, you still would have been cold. It was just colder than the devil. I see pictures of it now, and I look at it and I think, oh my God, how did we go through that? On Christmas Day, we were assigned to the 82nd Airborne, which was the greatest thing that ever happened, because those guys were just number one, first class guys all the way. Not just nice guys, but damn good fighters. They 82nd Airborne has my respect. And the whole battalion felt the same way. And they loved us too. We got letters from after the war from their commanding general. General Gavin was his name. He sent letters telling us that we were the best tank battalion that they ever worked with. And they had been in North Africa, Sicily, Italy, France, Belgium, and Holland. And that's what he told us. So we were pretty proud of that. Oh, the gunners we had were the best gunners. We were always getting accolades for having such good gunners. I remember when we changed over from the 82nd Airborne to another unit, the 82nd Airborne guys were telling their replacements that came in, they said, those guys, if you see something where you want to hit with a gun, he said, you just tell these guys in these tanks, they'll hit it. You just tell them where it is. If you can point to it, that's fine, but tell them where it is, they'll hit it. And they had a reputation for being able to just hit anything that you pointed. After the Battle of the Bulge, we went into the Siegfried Line, and we had to take the Germans out of there, and that was a worse battle, I think, than the Bulge, except the weather was a little better. Not great, but better. And that was a terrible fight. It was very, very difficult with the 82nd Airborne people. To start with, a lot of people don't know what the Siegfried Line was. You see pictures of it, but what it was with concrete things sticking up out of the ground in a whole line, right down the border of Germany, the border from Holland all the way down to Switzerland. That was just to stop the tanks. And it would stop a tank in the 30s. But with us by that time, well, we could just push dirt over these things and ride right over the top of them. But to get there, you had to be able to knock out these blockhouses. The Germans were smart the way they put their blockhouses. They had a blockhouse here with a gun in it, one over here and one over here, all being able to give mutual support. And then those two over here, they had the same setup. They had the same thing on theirs. And that's just the way it was for about 2 miles, right straight across the border. And a lot of these bunkers were hidden. You couldn't see them till you got on top of them practically. Some of them they even built as basements to homes. And they just built a house, a fake house, but it looked realistic right on top of it. So you'd think there was just a house there, and you might shoot up the house just to let them know that if there's anybody in there, that you're there, you know. But those were difficult because you didn't know what was going to be there. And these blockhouses were anywhere from 3 to 8 feet thick, and this all sides and top. And all of them had a pipe coming out for their heater in the blockhouse. And many times the only way they could knock them out was put hand grenades in those things, and they would come down into and then explode and blow the heater apart, and that would help kill some of them inside. But all of them, the infantry had to take them. The only thing we could do is try to get around into the embrasure where their German guns stuck out. If we could do that, it wasn't bad, but of course you were being fired at too by that same gun, so you had to do it fast and you had to do it as accurate as you could. In a tank, you don't run willy-nilly down a road looking this way, because all you can see is about like that going down the road. Maybe you can see to the edge of the road, both sides. But unfortunately, it's very difficult to see in these periscopes when you're running. So we never did keep the hatches closed on our tanks if we could help it. The tank commander was the poor devil that had to keep his head sticking out on the outside. The driver and the bow gunner, they both had their heads above the top of the tank so they could see where they were going. And the loader and the gunner, they were the ones that stayed inside the tank. So yeah, it was good to have the hatches open so you could see them, because your eyes are continually looking. If you see a mound of dirt over there, you make sure you check that one out, because it could be something in back of it. Or you see a farmer's yard and there'll be a haystack there, and you never bypass that without shooting at it, because many times you'd fire just a machine gun at it, and machine gun rounds would be just ricochet off of metal. So you knew there was a tank underneath that pile of hay. And they were smart. That's what they did, that kind of stuff. You just had to be on your toes and watching everything. And if you got laxed 1 minute during a shootout, if you got laxed for a minute, you generally got nailed, because it was touch and go all the time. It was good that we were young. I mean, some of the guys that were older men, you kind of felt sorry for them because they had wives and kids. And I hated to see any of those guys get hit, but we lost some. And the younger guys, they were a little more, I don't know, happy-go-lucky, you know. They'd try anything once. And there was always the good and the bad. There was always the one kind you had to kick them in the behind to get them doing anything, and the other kind that was, get out of my way, here I go. And thank God we had people like that. We got to Durham, and we had to go across this plain, and there was a lot of villages, just almost like this along the road, all the way into Cologne. And we had to cross over one canal there called the Erft Canal, and there was a hell of a battle there. We had to borrow somebody's bridge after they got over so that we could get across this little canal. And then it was straight shooting all the way into Cologne. And we were with the 8th Infantry Division at that time. We finally got into Cologne, and we were on the south side of Cologne, right? Taking the south part of the town. We could see the famous cathedral over in the center of town. And the 3rd Armored Division took the center of town, and they had quite a tank battle in town. And we had a lot of tanks we had to knock out in the south part of town, but most of them were up in the center part of Cologne. The funny thing was that the cathedral there, beautiful old cathedral, has been there for centuries, and it's right next to the train station. Now, why they put the train station that close to that old cathedral, I'll never know, because, well, of course, they didn't know about bombing in those days, too, but the bombers had to hit the train station to knock it out continually because the Germans were bringing supplies in that way. The Germans took all the fancy glass out of the windows and covered them up with wood, and they stored those glass so they could put it back up when the war ended. But it was a hell of a fight through there in Cologne. So after we secured Cologne, well, they told us to go back up to the town of Aachen, Germany, and it had been the first town in Germany, major town in Germany, captured by Americans. And so we went up to Aachen and got on trains, flat cars, put our tanks on them, and back through France, down, made a big sweeping turn, and went down to the Siegfried Line all over again. And we thought, oh my God, I had to take that line again. And we did that. And then they sent us back up the Rhine River to the town of Bonn, B-O-N-N, which later became the capital of West Germany. And we went across the Rhine River and back up across the Rhine from Cologne. And they started there, what they called the Ruhr Pocket. They started from this little town just across from Cologne, and all the units, all the divisions that were up there, they all did the same thing. Great big half arc there, knocking out Germans as they went. And they grabbed thousands of German soldiers as prisoners of war there, just thousands. I can't even describe how many thousands there were, but you'd take an area like this, it'd be nothing but humanity. People standing, sitting, laying, and all they had was a little bit of a fence around them with MPs every now and then to keep them from escaping. We ended up in Dusseldorf, And we finally got a break. He gave us 2 weeks off. We got a chance to take a shower and clean up our tanks and clean up all of our equipment. And we were sitting there, fat, dumb, and happy after getting a shower. After that length of time, we hadn't had a shower in 2 or 3 months. And so they told us to get up to this town of Blakita. And we got up there to this little town. Engineers were building a bridge there. And General was out there raising Cain with them, wanting them to hurry up, hurry up. We had orders to get as fast as we can across the Elbe River and head north. We couldn't figure out why. We were going to go up to help the British. So we got across the Elbe finally. They got the bridge in. We went across and we turned left, heading north. Took the 82nd and 8th Infantry Division up there, and we dropped the 82nd off at the town of Ludwigslust. And we took them into the town of Ludwigslust, and we found out that there was a concentration camp just outside of Ludwigslust named Wobelen. It's not a famous one, but it was a work camp where they worked people to death. And we helped break down some of the fences so that they could get in there and support the people, take care of them, feed them, what have you. And then we headed back north again. They were after us continually. Head north, keep going north, hurry up, hurry up. So we'd just go like the devil as fast as we could on the roads. And if we came across Germans, we'd either kill them or they would surrender. If they surrendered, we'd tell them to lay their weapons down in front of the tank and keep moving back. And then we'd go forward and we'd just drive over their weapons and destroy them so they couldn't be used. And then we'd go up to the next spot. If a German holdout was there, well, we'd have to destroy them and keep going as fast as we could. We captured the airfield, and our gunners were having fun sitting there watching the Germans try to take off. Our gunners were so good, they wanted to see if they could get the airplane before it got out of the air. And so they'd just shoot at them, and they'd knock them down. They'd just get off the ground and come down like that. And so we had a chance to stop there for a few hours, and this one guy found the place with the photo lab where the Germans had all their photo equipment and film and what have you, and they got 70 millimeter film that the Germans used on their airplanes for proof that they shot down an airplane. And they had the Germans slice this right down the middle, so it made 2 rolls of 35 millimeter film. And if they had cameras, well, they could use the film for that. Nobody had cameras. One or 2 guys did, but how they got them, I don't know. They caught somebody that had one when they were capturing them, I guess. So we made it up to the north where we were supposed to go and join up with the British at the town of Schwerin. And we were still amazed why we had to meet them there, but we found out many years later that the reason for it was the Russians were coming from the east, and they were afraid that they might try to get into Denmark and take Denmark as a final gesture at the end of the war. So they sent us up to have like a show of force. Here's the British Army and the American Army sitting there blocking the Russians. So it worked, and that's where we ended the war. And of course, in communications, we were doing nothing but running all the time. We had radios on half tracks, and we had to run a lot of lines for telephones, and we had radio repair all the time, and ran the message center for delivering messages or whatever to the line units. If somebody had something that they had like a group of maps for the next area where we were going to go, we'd have to take that to each line company so they knew what route to take. We knew the war was going to end soon because Germans had nothing else now. We had been in as far as we could go. So we were just sitting around trying to get cleaned up again. Whenever we got a chance to take halfway clean, well, we would. So that's what we were doing, and then the word came through that the war ended, and there were some slaps on the back and handshaking, and mostly it was, thank God, and I wonder how the people back home were doing, that kind of thing. and everybody was just worn out. It was just like, taking a long trip, and at the end of it, you're just worn out to a point you can't go another step. Well, you'd lay down somewhere and fall asleep, and they'd just let you sleep. They wouldn't even bother you. They knew what it was. So after you'd finally wake up and realize where you were and nobody was shooting at you, then you realize, oh, the war's ended. Well, thank God for that. And that more tired than anything. We didn't. Even if there was any booze around, which there may have been, they generally had some booze somewhere around the unit. I didn't see anybody getting drunk. They were all just kind of like worn out. I guess it's like after being able to sleep after being on a long trip on the road, and that's what it was. We were so filthy too. All we wanted to do was get cleaned up. Every time we stopped, we wished we could find water and soap and at least get some of the grime off. But I think back and I see pictures of some of the guys had, and you could see their hands were filthy dirty and their faces were. Well, you ride along on the road, and all kinds of stuff hitting your face, and you get pretty dirty. That's the way it was. It was not the excitement that they had in this country. I was told that when VE Day was announced, that people were out in the streets and drinking and kissing everybody that came along, and all that kind of stuff, climbing up light poles and that kind of thing. We weren't doing that. We were looking for a place to sleep. But I don't know how other units felt at the end of it, but that's the way it was with us. We were just flat worn out, and we knew our battalion commander was an old cavalryman, and you always make sure your horse is cleaned and put away before you get your own bed. And so we had to clean up our tanks, and they hadn't been cleaned up for God knows how long by that time. And if the guys were asleep, they just let them sleep if they were worn out that much. It was pretty laid back, in other words. Doesn't seem possible now, I think about it. But I didn't come home like the rest of them did. Especially the guys that were married. Everybody wanted to go home. Well, I didn't particularly want to go home. I thought, here I am in Europe. I'll never get a better chance to see the rest of Europe than by staying there if I can. So I found out that if you re-enlisted right then and there, they would give you 30 days back in the States, and you'd have to go back through the replacement setup again. So I thought, well, hell, that's good. I want to stay in anyway, so I signed up for 3 years and went home for 30 days. Which didn't come off my leave time, but they gave it to me for re-enlisting. And I came back with a lot of the guys that were coming back to stay back and to get out of the service. They thought I was crazy, but I was still only 16 when the war ended. Thought I'd died and gone to heaven because I got a chance to stay in Europe. So when I went back, they brought us down to the area just north of Frankfurt, and they spread us out, or the whole battalion spread out. We had headquarters in this one town of Limburg, and it was right near one of the hospitals the Germans had where they killed people before the war. If you had any kind of a bad leg and couldn't walk, or one arm or something, you were useless to them. If you were useless to them, they'd take you to this hospital and run stupid tests on you, how long you could last in cold water, and put you in trucks and run a pipe to the exhaust, and that's where they did a lot of it in this town of Hadamar. I'll never forget that. It was just a hell of a place. I remember reading about it before I went over, and I thought, gee, I'm pretty lucky to be able to see these things. So I got to go down to Dachau and see that thing before they cleaned it up, and having seen a little bit of Woblin, where we knocked down some fences for them. I was wondering what was going on there with these concentration camps, because we didn't know a heck of a lot about those things yet. And when I went down to Dachau, they passed a law, or Eisenhower told all the commanders to let as many troops go to these camps as possible to see what they were fighting for. And I'll tell you, the camps, I dreamed about Dachau for years. I mean years, up to since I've been here. I've been here 10, 11 years. I wake up in the middle of the night and smell dead bodies and smell the smells of the concentration camp. And I'd wake up and I gotta check, see if that was me or what the heck was. Where did I get that smell in the middle of the night? You know, I know you dream in your brain, but I didn't think you could dream smells too. But boy, I was sure dreaming them. And for many years, I'd wake up crying or smelling that damn smells from over there. And just in the last 4 or 5 years, I've been able to get by without it, without dreaming about it. But for instance, I was interviewed by the lady that runs the Holocaust Museum, and I could hardly talk to her about it, because bringing some of that stuff back, I just fall apart. I told her, I said, I'd love to see your museum, but I don't want to see it. I would love to see it, but I don't want to see it. And she said, well, she said, it's not for you anyway, it's for people that have never seen it, seen the Holocaust. And she says, we're trying to get to the people that don't know what it's all about. And she says, so if you think you couldn't take it, well, don't go. But I guess they let World War II veterans in for free. And I don't even want to go in there for free. I mean, I saw enough of it. I don't need to go back and have a reminder of it. I'll tell you what got me for years there. I remember when I went into Munich, into Dachau, one of the first places I went to at the time, they had a brick floor in the crematorium. And in between each of these bricks, there was a light gray material there. I couldn't figure it out. It was all over the floor. So I couldn't figure out what that was. And so I looked at the crematorium and in the furnaces and so forth. And I went around and back, and there was a pile of this gray stuff that I saw between the rocks, right there in back of the stove. And they had drug it out, and it was laying there in a pile. And I broke down and I bawled like a baby. I said, my God, now it's getting to me. I said, oh my God, I've been walking on how many thousands of people. And it just did me in. And I told this lady about that same thing. I said, that's the reason I can't go to the museum. I said, it'll get to me. And it really does. Every time I think about it, I break down. And I always think about it when I'm talking about those damn places. You know, I can't even talk about them without cussing. Every name I ever thought of, I know I used in my discussions of them. It's hard not to. Germans were, and I'm German descent. That's the sad part. They were just terrible people at that time, but they could let a little jackass like Hitler get them the way they were doing. I don't know. I was reading the VFW or American Legion magazine one day, and I saw that the 740th was going to have a reunion. Well, I had planned on going, but my wife died, and I thought I'm not ready to meet the public yet. And so I wrote to him and told him, I said, well, I wanted to come, but my wife just passed away. I'll make it next year. So anyway, I finally made it to the reunions and saw a lot of the guys, and I'll never forget this one fellow in particular. He was a full-blooded Cherokee Indian. He was my boss. His name was Hummingbird. I said, is he here? This guy looks at me and says, that's me. I didn't even recognize him. So many of them had changed so much. And a lot of the wives came up to me and they said, were you in the 740th? And I said, yeah. I said, well, you look so young. Said, my husband doesn't look like you. And all that kind of stuff. And I told her, I said, well, you know, I was young when I was in the 740th. And I told them, they didn't even, a lot of them didn't even know I was that young as I was. So I guess I hit it pretty well. Yeah, I stayed in, I went to the last reunion. Well, the last one was last year. And of course, I'm the only one that goes anymore. The last guys are all too old. There's only 3 more left that we know of. I was the secretary for them for 16 years, and it was quite a job taking care of them. Some of the guys you thought were going to be the big tough guys were pussycats when they got to the point. And some of the guys you thought were just pussycats turned out to be damn good fighters. And so you met all kinds and met some damn nice people. Excuse me. I do this all the time. I talk about these people. I met some guys that were just great guys, just fabulous guys. You're proud of the fact that you know them. You get to know their families, and being secretary, I knew all of them. Excellent. We stayed friendly for years. I've seen many of them die, and here I heard about many of them dying too. That yeah, it makes you think. Well, you get down there's only 3 of us now, and when's it my turn? Why am I still around? I've lived a full life, and I'm very happy about it. But you know, you get up to your 90s, and you really are a fugitive of the law of averages, because it can happen any minute, any day, to anybody. But when you're in your 90s, you know you only got a little bit more going for you. So do the best you can and enjoy what you got. And I hope other people should be that way. They should quit trying to take what the other guys got and be happy with what they've got, because you can't take it with you. The World War II Memorial, I wish I could live down there, at least close by where I could get there, or even walking there. I said, I'd even be able to pitch a tent there, but I know they wouldn't let me do that. But I said, if I could do that, I would do it, because I love being there. Every time I go there, I'm amazed at the people that I talk to. The people are patriotic. Only the patriots go down there. The ones that couldn't care less, they're the ones that just pass it by, you know. And the people that you talk to, they want to talk to you about World War II, and they all want to let you know that they had a grandfather or a father that was in the World War II. And sometimes you meet some that just break your heart. This one couple, one time, they stopped me, and the woman told me about her dad had been in World War II, but she didn't know what outfit he was in. Her husband walked up to me. This guy was gigantic. He reminds you of an ape without hair, if you can think of something like that. But this guy walked up to me, put his hand out to shake my hand, and he said, my father was killed during the Battle of the Bulge, and he started crying. And he got a hold of me and hugged me. And I mean, he cried and I cried. That was something. But you know, you get the feeling that you're getting to people when you go down there to that monument. I love it. I really do. And I don't know, I guess I just get sentimental about it, because I meet people other veterans that were in the same kind of crap that I was in, and you meet kids and grandkids that want to talk about their parents, and it's nice to run into people like that, because it means that somebody appreciates what you did. I'm thankful for what I was able to do and accomplish, and everything. I'm probably one of the few people. Everything I started to do, I accomplished it, and in some cases even exceeded what I had set out to do. And so that to me, you can only happen in this country.